Hey, what's going on, Ohio Youth Ministries? It's your Network Youth Director, Nate Ortiz, and I am so excited to have this conversation with you about mental health. It's an important topic amongst teenagers, especially all that's going on in the world. And I brought my good friend Daniel Houck to have this conversation with us. He's a great friend, and he has so much wisdom to share in this topic. He's been a pastor and he's been in the mental health field for over 30 years. So he has lots of experience, but him and his wife, Patty, they are leading a Gateway Church in Ashtabula, and they are doing a phenomenal job. I love that church and everyone there. But he has been in Ohio, New York, Pennsylvania, and has worked in lots of different churches, and even just even in the mental health field. He's worked in just group homes. He's worked with families. He's worked in the psychiatric ward. And so I feel like he's really going to bring a great perspective to this conversation that we're going to have, and I'm really looking forward to it. So, Pastor Dan, I want to pull you up on the screen here. Can you give a greeting to everyone as we get started in this conversation?
Hello, my friend Nate. It's so good to see you. And I know there's some other youth pastors and maybe some parents, maybe some teens that are listening. It's a joy to be with you, my friend.
Awesome. Well, thank you. And we're going to hop right into it. The heart of this, Pastor Dan, we've talked about it, and I was so happy when you were able and willing to do this. I know, right, when it comes to mental health and talking with teenagers, talking with parents, it's really unique. It's a big conversation to have, and we're not going to be able to have all that today, right? But we at least try to move people to a greater understanding of what it is to help someone with mental health, or even to deal with, especially from the youth pastor perspective. So, Pastor Daniel, the first question I just want to ask you is: there's a lot of terms that we hear when it comes to mental health, right? We hear, you're depressed, or I'm feeling anxious, or those kind of things, and those are probably the two that I hear a lot. And so you just even break that down for us of, what is the difference between someone saying, yeah, I'm depressed, or yeah, I'm anxious.
Yeah. And you know what, Nate, one of the reasons you hear so much about it is you hear people talking about it. It's because it is very prevalent. And it's probably one of the most mental health issues that people deal with, whether it's teens or adults, whoever it might be. And so anxiety, depression, one of the reasons there's some confusion is because they're so interlocked so very, very often. Oftentimes when you're dealing with some depression, there's anxiety connected, or if you're dealing with anxiety long enough, it can sometimes lead to a depression. So one of the reasons you hear so much about those terms is because at one time or another, most of us, and I mean most of us, will deal with one or the other or both. And so it's very, very, it's kind of a common thing because we're all very emotional beings. And so that's one of the reasons that we hear those two terms. They're very closely connected, especially with teenagers and some of the hormonal inflections that you see with a teen. And so those are very, very common things for sure.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's like, I feel like the mental health conversation has really been elevated some levels where you'll hear, celebrities and, being in Ohio and following basketball. Like I know Kevin Love came out and talked about his about anxiety and even suffering anxiety attack for the first time and saying, what's going on? I don't even know what's happening right now.
Sure. That's so true. And I think that, for the church, been doing this for a while now, and I'm glad to hear and glad to see that the church as a whole has embraced the fact that, people are physical beings, spiritual beings, mental beings. We're just a mixture of all of that. And, someone can have the cold or have the flu or be dealing with a kidney issue, and we immediately know how to pray and ask God to touch them. The moment someone stands up and says, hey, listen, I'm dealing with anxiety, or I'm dealing with depression, immediately the church used to, sort of back off and say, well, just pray more and read the word more and God's going to meet you. And I think we've learned over the last, several years here that there are some skill sets that people have to help. Certainly God is keenly aware where we're at in our mind, our body, our soul, and our spirit. Nate, it's interesting. Currently right now at the church, we're doing a study on Psalm 139. And when we talk a little bit about this topic, I couldn't help but think of the first couple of verses. It says, Lord, you've examined me and you know all about me. That to me is comforting. It's comforting. He knows all about us. He knows how we tick. And the last part, it says, you know my thoughts before I even think them. And so I think anyone that deals with anxiety or depression in any shape or form should be comforted by the fact that the very Lord who loves each of us deeply knows what we think, knows how we think, knows some of the struggles we have, and he loves us just the same. And to me, that's tremendously encouraging for anybody dealing with any of these mental health issues or any of the symptoms that sometimes we see.
Right. No, absolutely. I think you don't want to hear people talk about who've worked in the field of mental health or they've struggled with mental health in their own personal life. It's challenging because it's hard to put words to it. I feel like people, when you're feeling depressed, and well-meaning people who come around you and say, like, cheer up, like, hey, let's go do something fun. And it's like, that's not, for that person, it's not helpful, battling depression. So even tell me this, like, how would you encourage someone, right? Someone who's dealing with depression or, some type of mental health. And, you're a family member, you're a youth pastor, you're a friend, and you're really trying to like pull that person out of that, that depression, that mental health issue. What are some ways that you feel like are beneficial and not hurtful? You feel like we're like something, but sometimes what we do is maybe not the best.
Yeah, sure. That's a really good thought. We've all seen that happen in our lives where there's someone that we know that are dealing with some either situational depression or perhaps clinical depression. And of course, there's a little bit of a difference there where they're highly anxious. And, we're very well-meaning. We say, come on, you need to just come out. And, of course, you can see at my age, I'm doing the phone thing, right? No, nowadays it's what? It's this. Come on, you can come with us. And, they do the texting thing.
Rotary. You didn't do the Rotary.
Now listen, hey now. Although we used to have that. But nowadays it's this, hey, come out with us. And sometimes, as well-meaning as that is, it tends to drive people even deeper, either to isolate themselves, self-isolate, or, their self-talk gets in the way so very, very frequently in these issues with anxiety and depression. Self-talk is huge. So, when we talk about how do we help a teenager or how does a teenager help another teenager? And I think more than anything, one of the first steps in that as a youth pastor, as a parent, as a people helper, is to help that individual feel connected and to feel heard and to feel like they're being listened to. And I think sometimes we want to, especially as leaders, as ministry leaders, as youth pastors, as parents, we want to fix things, And I think when someone's going through those types of feelings down deep inside, they need to know that they're in a safe place where they can convey their thoughts. They're not going to be judged. They're going to be heard. They're going to be listened to. And even though that parent or that youth pastor or that peer may not understand all of what's going on, most likely they won't, because none of us do, but at least they're being valued and they're being told, listen, I love you where you're at. I'm here for you. I'm listening to you. And that really is one of the basis of the beginning of offering the help that any individual needs dealing with some of these issues.
Wow, that's really good. I had a couple questions here, and I'm looking to the side here to make sure I get them. So, the genesis of this conversation was, with mental health and people just, being in their houses. It's a lot, right? It's a lot. It's I think, when I was growing up, there used to be like, it was just the joke that people would hear, like, when I was your age, I was walking to school, uphill both ways, right? This kind of thought.
Yeah.
There's a generation of kids that are going to grow up and say, like, I remember at the pandemic of 2020, right? This that was very life altering for kids in different ways, where we think about seniors and we'll talk about those kind of things, but really, really impactful in a serious way. And so one of the things I wanted to ask is, with the majority of people being in their house, one of the things we've heard about people, it's affected people in mental health, being in a home, not being able to go places, the routine. What should people be mindful of, whether you are dealing with health, or just you're in a weird space right here. What?
Oh yeah.
That was a big question. Sorry, that was.
Yeah. Well, you're a big guy, so I can handle that. So, I guess one of the things that we're all dealing with in these last 6 or 8 weeks None of us, this is the only solace that I have as a leader, is no one's ever done this before. And that brings me some comfort. All of us are in the same boat in our families, in our households, trying to lead churches, trying to lead people, trying to go to school. Our youngest daughter was away at school, and now she's been home and trying to navigate what that looks like. And we've got parents that are being forced to be teachers, and they've never been a teacher before, and they're trying to homeschool their child for the first time ever. And, there's some homes that aren't so large, and they're kind of on top of each other. And so all these stressors are building, and they are growing. And you're seeing some behaviors in children. You're seeing some behaviors in teenagers, frankly, adults as well, that aren't real healthy. And that you need to give each other some room, give each other some space, recognize that, we all react and respond differently. There might be, it's almost like in a marriage. Sometimes, one spouse is having a really good season of life. Another one really maybe isn't. In a kind of a micro version of that. That's what's happening in homes right now. And, you have to look at the irritability factor in some of these teenagers. Again, as a youth pastor, they're missing their friends, the whole Skype thing, the whole Facebook thing, the whole Snapchat thing, all that doesn't quite cut it, because I believe God's made us to be relational beings. And when we can't have those connections on a deeper level, I think that's something that most people are missing. And when you have to isolate, people do tend to retreat, and they just miss that interaction. There's sometimes an increase in eating or a decrease in eating. There's an increase in sleeping or a decrease in sleeping. For some, there's an increase in alcohol consumption. All of that is happening. We know the studies are showing this last month or two, there's been an increase in domestic violence. There's been an increase in suicidal tendencies or suicidal ideations, or even completion of suicide. So the mental health aspect of this season is real. And as leaders, as youth pastors, as parents, we can't turn our eye to that. We have to be able to recognize when it's just sort of an irritable day versus when things are going a little bit lower and a little bit deeper, and we need to be more concerned for our children or for the teens that God's entrusted into our care. So I think, learning more about those things, what you're doing right now, Nate, trying to provide some camaraderie, but also some information, I think is extremely helpful. Because here's the bottom line. You look up and down your street in your neighborhood, and pretty much every household is going through the same thing. It doesn't matter their nationality. It doesn't matter their religious history, their spiritual history. All of us are kind of right now, 6-8 weeks in, we're all going to kind of go stir crazy, And so this is some real stuff that we're dealing with here for sure.
Yeah. And it's, I think, mental health, right, it's an ongoing conversation, right? It's not just, wow, this is a tough situation and we move on. And I think that's one of those things where, we want to, help people be mindful that, this is something that keep the conversation going for people.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, well, that crazy time was over. Now we can move, on with life or get back to normal. And so, thank you for answering that question. That was really.
And I think, Nate, if I can say, I think that, what I said earlier, we recognize that, some years back, there was a lot more shame placed on mental health issues. If someone knew you were depressed, or someone knew you were going for counseling, for example, there was a shame. And I think over these last, 5-10 years, and like you'd mentioned some celebrities or sports heroes that are being a little bit more transparent with their issues, I think it's helpful because we all go through stuff in life. And I think it helps to take that shame, umbrella off, and we can kind of let things come into the light and recognize we need each other. So these conversations are very, very helpful.
Yeah, and I was in a conference one time, and it was a pastor, and he was saying, talk about mental health, and he was saying, in the same way, right, you get your car tuned up, you get, all these different there's a lot of things you absorb, a lot of things you take, and sometimes you don't realize it till you're taking a moment to really evaluate your own, not your spiritual health, right? It's two different. But to sit down and say, spiritually I'm doing great, physically maybe I'm doing great, but like mentally I feel like there's a battle raging there. But right, there could be a level of shame with that. To your point, when you feel like, well, I'm leading people, I'm pastoring, I'm high up in this organization, or I'm a student. Everyone thinks I don't have any struggles. I'm leading in my youth ministry, or whatever that looks like. But it's like, wow, who do I really process what I'm really feeling when I'm by myself? Thoughts that are contradictory to what I'm hearing at church, what people think about me.
Yeah.
So, you know, I touched on briefly talking about students who I really do believe it, right? I feel like on the other side of this, whatever that looks like, right? Who knows? And I don't want to say, what's normal, right? But on the other side, as we move forward, there are going to be students, I believe, who are going to be mourning what has taken place. We can understand to say, well, you didn't have your graduation, or oh, you didn't have your prom, or oh, you didn't have your senior walkout, or you didn't have these things. Even an eighth grader going to high school, right? It's unique to think, wow. I remember I was eighth grade going to high school. I was excited to think that people are like, what does this really look like? So my question is, how do we help students mourn this in an appropriate way? So we're not just saying, get over it, we're moving on, but help us process all of these.
Yeah. And honestly, Nate, when you use the word mourn, I think that's so very, very vital. And of course, with mourning, there's grief, and with grief, there's been a loss. And I think for all of us, the bottom line is COVID-19 has robbed each and every one of us of some stuff. And it may have robbed you and your family of something different than me and my family, but certainly, I graduated from high school, I've graduated from college, and I know how monumental those things are. And I remember prom and all those important things for a senior. And the bottom line is they've been robbed of that. And with that robbery, there's some grief attached to it because there's a loss. And, I think about the word ritual and, whatever that word means in your brain. But for me, things like graduations and senior prom, those are some things that mark kind of a line of demarcation for so many of us, that when that's not afforded to us, it's really something that you have to learn how to navigate that information. I recently learned of one of our families that their senior daughter was not able to go to prom, of course, because they're not in school. And so the family, and I think this is how you have to be innovative and creative to create sort of a similar ritual. The family went ahead and did their own home prom. So dad and mom both dressed up. Dad had a suit and tie on. They had a corsage. They had the pretty dress. They had all the trimmings. And when I heard that story, it just warmed my heart, because I thought, number one, what a loving and caring thing for these parents to do for their daughter. And yes, it's not quite the same as a senior prom at school, but my golly, that's something she will never forget. And I think we have to be creative, and God's made us to be creative and innovative. And I think if we put our heads together, we can do some of these things that they sort of meet some of the same need. Because again, that young lady who's probably 17 or 18 now, 50 years down the road, she's going to be telling her grandchildren about what her senior prom looked like, and how her father and mother and their siblings were present. So I think that, even though we've been robbed, even though some of these rituals are very, very different, even though there's some grieving happening and we are mourning the loss of these things, we have to establish some new routines, some new rituals in this season to sort of restore that hope and restore that excitement, even though it's going to look a lot different. I've heard different school systems that are trying different ways to honor their seniors and their graduating seniors. I've heard many different versions of what they're trying to make it as special as they can, even though it's not going to be the same. It can still be a line of demarcation for them.
Right. And I think that's good. I think being creative in the season, it's pushing all of us to be a little more creative and trying to make the best of the situation. And so, as we talk about mental health, right, I think of two different types of people, right? There may be people that this has put a strain on them in a different way that they're not really accustomed to. How do you help someone who is, and these two different people that I'm describing, someone who's, I've never really had an issue with mental health in my life. How do I maintain, right? How do I maintain this great mental health in the middle of a quarantine? And the other person is, how do you help someone who says mental health is a battle for me, and attacks are much more constant due to the situation at hand?
Sure. And, again, that's some really, that's, honestly, Nate, that's where the rubber meets the road. Because, for all of us, if we were honest, no matter where you're at in the mental health right now, these last 6-8 weeks have been a challenge for each and every one of us. And you can imagine if someone's already somewhat fragile in their emotional state, we're all emotional beings, but if someone's already somewhat fragile in their emotional state, sometimes this is just the extra weight, the extra burden that takes them down a road of some really negative thinking, some emotional challenges, their self-talk changes, and some of the ways that any of us can improve our mental health in these seasons, and even quote unquote regular seasons, whatever that means. Obviously we need to have our walk with Christ solid. I mean, that is the foundation for sure. To pray and communicate with our Heavenly Father. Again, I said earlier in the scripture that he knows our thoughts. He knows how we're operating, and he knows how we're wired. And so we need to stay in communion with him and to press into him, leaning on some healthy people in your world. Right now we can't necessarily go out for coffee with somebody. We can certainly talk to them on the phone or some other social media outlet, but pulling in people that you honor, that you respect, that you trust, that can be that listening ear. I think our diet has to be healthy. This is not the time to sit and eat 3 bags of Doritos and 4 cans of Coke for lunch every day. That's not going to help anybody. And reading the Word is important as well. So feeding our body correctly, feeding our spirit man correctly. So very, very important. It's easy in these seasons as well for any of us to look at all the loss and the negative and, what you can't do. But in the same breath, I've got some people in my life right now that are battling the virus. I've known 2 people that have lost their battle in the virus. Wow. And I sit as a man who's fairly healthy, and every day I wake up and say, Lord, thank you for giving me my health. Thank you, Lord, I have a roof over my head. Thank you, Lord, I have a car to drive. Thank you, Lord, I have a loving and caring family. And so you need to have an attitude of gratitude. Getting some exercise is important. Those are all important things. Getting an appropriate amount of rest. And another thing too, and I'll close with this part. The value of routine is something that we sometimes overlook. Structure and routine, most people respond to very favorably. And in this season where some people aren't working, they can kind of sleep in and they can go to bed when they want and sleep in when they want. And that's not the best way to handle it. And people that are in their bathrobes all day, that's probably not the best way to handle it. Get up, have a routine, have a little bit of structure, get up and get dressed or get showered, even though you don't have to go anywhere. All those things are decisions that you and I can make, that we can help our family members make, that do contribute to our mental health, our emotional health, that structure, that routine, getting rest, our appetite, all of those things are some things we do have control over. So again, there's things we don't have control over. Many things right now I don't have control over. I don't know when some of these things are going to come up to full speed. I don't know when as a church we're going to actually be able to meet again. I don't know those things, but I do have control over a lot of things in my life, and I take refuge in that. And I'm grateful that I still have some say over those things, and that can actually help people feel a little bit more stable and move forward in some of their emotional concerns.
That's good. Yeah, I think, routine. I mean, you said it all, but that word probably stuck out to me in that, because everyone's routine is just thrown off in a major way. And so, right, there's maybe not that motivation, like, well, why put my clothes on? Nothing going on today.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Type of thing. So, yeah. So, in this season, for someone who's, let's say, for the first time in their life, they are saying, I think I'm dealing with anxiety. I had a friend of mine where he was a the super outgoing person. Just, go, and like is so personable. Lights everybody walks in, and this past year, he suffered his first anxiety attack, and it was just so like, what is happening? Or for even people who are really saying, wow, I feel like I'm slipping into not just I'm feeling sad, depressed, but really something a little more serious. What would you tell someone trying to figure those waters out for the very first time, and how to kind of process that, or what are some steps they should be taking?
Sure. Again, we go back to the value and the need and the benefit of having people in our lives that value us and listen and will hear us out and are a safe place. So my hope and prayer would be anyone listening to this, or anyone that's you're ministering to or trying to help, has someone in their world that they feel safe with, and they can at least convey some of their concerns and process some of those feelings. And just believe it or not, sometimes getting it out can help reduce some of the stress, and just getting some feedback from someone that you care about. Obviously, if it gets to the place where it's impacting more and more arenas of your life, it's impacting different things that are concrete things in your life. You're not eating, and your physical body is going down. You're making decisions that are contrary to your character. You're making decisions that are putting your life or your family's life at risk. And sometimes it gets to that place. And, obviously professional help is something that you'd want to consider. And, I've heard people say, well, I can't go see a counselor right now. Well, actually, most counseling services right now are doing telehealth. They're able to talk on the phone, and they can even still, if there's an insurance bill, or those things can still happen now. There's been some temporary changes in some of those regulations. So there is help out there. There's help available. And if you're a youth pastor and you're dealing with someone that's dealing with some of these issues for the first time, don't feel as though you have to put the weight of all of that on your shoulders and make the determination of where they're at. Get help. Seek some professional care to get you some answers and to encourage them to do the same. There's help out there. There's help out there. There's help out there. You don't have to go through this alone. And that's the message that we want to send to any individual. They say misery likes company. Not necessarily always like that phrase, but I do know this. It brings me comfort as a pastor right now. Some of the concerns I've had on my spirit trying to lead people, lead the church, lead the team is, the things I am wondering about, like, how are we going to handle this? How are we going to handle that? It brings me comfort to know that pretty much every other pastor out there right now is going through the same thing. And so it actually brings me a peace and a calm, because it's not just me.
Right.
So we'll figure it out together. We'll get through it. And some of these anxieties and some of these issues that people are owning right now in their lives, we need to give them the encouragement. You know what? This too shall pass. We will get through this. And I was thinking too, Nate, that, for the seniors, many of them were born right after 9/11, And so there they are, dealing with this new world after 9/11. Now they are seniors or around that age, dealing with this pandemic, and it's helping to shape some of their lives, and it's helping to shape their view of the world. And I think more than ever, we need to make sure that as believers, we always go to the fact that Christ is still our foundation, and He's the rock, and it will not be shaken. We have to pull down to that point and just base ourselves in our faith. This too shall pass. Christ does not change. God's not taken any of this. It's not a surprise to Him. He's going to help us through it.
Right. And, for someone who's watching this, I think the thing is, you talk about, like, the refuge that you find, and it's different things, right? God knowing just everything about us, and still loving, and caring for us, and leading people. Every pastor, everyone's being impacted by this on all levels. Things that in having this conversation with you, Pastor Daniel, is that you are not coming just from one angle of saying, well, I've been in ministry a long time, but you've been in the the public arena of mental health, and it's for those who've been in ministry, and I really mean this with the most sincerity, but when we're talking, like, you've been in psychiatric wards on the mental health side. I've been in that setting to visit someone. That's a very intense setting. That really is, and just to know that you've been in families, and you've been in psychiatric wards, and those kind of places. You've seen a lot, and so kind of what you're sharing comes from a deep, rich place. And so I had one more question I wanted to ask you before we wrap up this time. For youth pastors, a parent, even a student who says, I kind of want to even just seek help for myself, what are some resources that you know of, or that you even point people to? I know since mental health has become very much common to talk about, like, for lots of different reasons. One of the things I think about when I talk about youth pastors, right? If they're sitting with a student, or if they're at a at a youth service, and this dude's coming up and saying, I'm battling depression, or I'm battling anxiety, I'm battling some mental health issues. How do we help a youth pastor, like I said, a parent or student, get a little more educated in regards to how to best help that person that's standing in front of them, or that's on the other side of that screen, who they may be
Sure.
talking
Sure, sure. I'm reflecting back to more than 30 years ago when I was a youth pastor, and I can remember I had this. That was really before the internet, and so I had this really big Josh McDowell youth ministry book or something. It was like this thick, and boy, I use that all the time, because in there was references and ideas and little lessons on this issue and that issue. And boy, I think I wore that thing out, because I'd go to it constantly and look things up. Of course, nowadays all of us have access to a myriad of material out there, unlimited amount of information, sometimes too much, because you don't know what's valid, what's not. So yeah, I think, anyone listening to this, you can Google about anything you want and learn a few things. Hopefully some of it's right. I think, it's important to have trusted sources, names that we can know that what we read from them and their people, their team, is going to be valid. It's going to be biblically based and be truth. And believe it or not, Focus on the Family is a source I've used for a long time. They still maintain cutting edge material, cutting edge education, cutting edge information, and you can trust it. Focus on the Family is obviously they have 800 numbers, and they have hop online, whatever you want to do. But as a youth pastor, you can find information there. As a family, as a parent, as a teenager, there's something for everybody. It's trusted. It's been proven. Focus on the Family has been around a long, long time, and they've got some amazing people connected to that organization. So that's one for sure. National Mental Health Institute is one that I've used. Again, mental health is mental health, whether or not there's a Christian base to it. And so, learning about some of the disorders that are out there, learning about some of the issues that people bring to the table with some challenges and their emotions. It's good information that I've used over time. And mentalhealthministries.net is another source that I've used. It's a faith-based resources. There's a lot of other resources in there if you want to keep it more faith-based. But Nate, if I can, I just want to share just one other quick little factoid, I guess. It's amazing as believers, we hear that, grandpa's got a heart issue or grandma's got a kidney issue, and we listen to her talk about it. We pray for her. We believe God's going to touch her. We have no problem taking them to the doctor or to the hospital. And we just believe that between God's help and the medical community, there's going to be some help there. But for some reason, even though the stigma has been lifted somewhat, it's still like this big unknown about mental health. And you've mentioned I've worked in a lot of different psych wards, and I have. I've been involved with psychiatric hospitals and things like that over the years. And, I've talked to many, many, many spirit-filled Christians that are patients in mental health wards. And really, there's no difference between that person there getting the help they need than the person on the next floor above them in the hospital getting help for their kidney. In my book, there's no difference. So God cares about the kidney. God cares about the emotions. God cares about the mind. And so we need to get it into our minds that, when someone presents with an emotional challenge or a mental health challenge, it's no different than grandma's kidney issue or grandpa's heart issue. And I hope that stigma continues to lift so people feel more comfortable talking about these issues.
Yeah, that's really, really good. Because, right, I think sometimes when we get into these unknown waters, we kind of just want to just kind of brush through and like, let's just push through, especially when it's...
Yeah, you want to freeze. Yeah.
Yeah, especially...
Yeah.
Mental health, right? So, we feel it's a little more obvious when it's like, this broad example, right? Someone has a kidney or it's like this, there's a physical manifestation of this issue, a broken leg or whatever it might be. But mental health, sometimes we feel like, well, you just need to kind of snap out, or let's get you out in the sunshine. You'll cheer up, or hey, we did this great vacation, or your questions like, what do you even have to be depressed about, or like,
right.
Type of things to pull people out. But you stated earlier, sometimes that even pushes people further into isolation. Because
it does.
Kind of piles on shame or this feeling of like, I know I shouldn't be feeling this, but I am. And now I feel like it's evident to everyone around me. but just being present for people, looking at some of those resources and going to trusted sources. And I think another thing you said was great was not to put the weight of all that. If you're a youth pastor, to not take the weight of all that and feel like you have to fix this thing.
Right.
And so that was really great, great insight and great resources you gave us. Pastor Dan, I'm just processing it all. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's been a privilege.
I know this is going to encourage people and bring people just some hope in the middle of this situation. And like I said, this is a conversation that is continuous and going on. But before we close out, was there anything you wanted to say or share? Anything you want to cut you?
Sure. Yeah, I think, in ministry, we have to know our limitations. And some of you may hear me say it and go, well, what are you saying there, bro? God's unlimited. Well, God's unlimited. But I know also I've had mechanics before that have tried to fix my car. And I realized that, they had their limitations because they were great mechanics, but they weren't good transmission guys. So they sent me to a transmission guy. So I think it's important that we know our limitations. And none of us know everything, for sure. None of us know everything. And so when you get into an area that especially could literally mean life or death with someone, make sure you seek the help and the guidance that you need and recognize your limitations. And having said that, if I can ever be a resource for someone, any of these youth pastors or anyone that I can provide any feedback for, I'd be happy to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if you're watching this, obviously Pastor Dan's on social media outlets, but I'd be more than happy to, get you,
sure,
that you guys can connect. And like I said, there's big conversation of out there, and even Emerge, that's obviously something that's very well known in Ohio as well. Of just
absolutely, Emerge is one of the best in the country, literally, and it's in our backyard. Yeah.
So, and that's in the Akron area there, and obviously a great, and like I said, a long history there. That's been there time and is proven, and so so many great things, and we want to continue the conversation as we minister to teenagers, because this is an issue for them. For them, but for all people, and we want to be equipped to just love God's people and minister to them the best way we can. So, Pastor Daniel, thank you again for your time. We love you and appreciate you.
Sure, buddy.
And we know that there's a lot of people.
Joy.
Thank you.
Yeah. Blessings. It's been fun.